A Death on Location is the 4th/5th book in the Canon Clement series by our old favourite, the Reverend Richard Coles. I say 4th/5th because there is a novella that is set between this one and the previous novel, Murder at the Monastery, called Murder Under the Mistletoe. It's a Christmas novella, which I have read and I have reviewed, but that review will not be going up until December because Christmas. Murder Under the Mistletoe is referenced in this one, so it is canon. But it is also a novella, so I suppose it's number 3.5, and this is number 4, whatever. A Death on Location takes us back to Champton, where Bernard de Flors is hosting a film studio in the throes of producing a movie about Queen Anne of Denmark. Not Queen Anne Gloria, even though Anne of Denmark was also a Queen of England due to her marriage to King James I, or James VI, if you're Scottish. The film is called something like The Woman of Boundless Intrigue, which is a kind of a rubbish title, but whatever. Anyway, because Queen Anne visited Champton for realsies, the film's director decides to use it as a location for The Mask of the Queens, a real mask written by Ben Jonson and designed by Inigo Jones for Queen Anne. Unfortunately, whilst filming one of the mask scenes where the performance falls apart and turns to hedonistic chaos, Margaret, an extra from the village, is stabbed and killed. But who could have done it? How did they stab her? And why would anyone want Margaret, who had no enemies, dead? Fortunately, Daniel is on hand to help Neil Van Loo solve this curiously masked mystery. I do think this is the strongest of the books so far. The mystery probably holds together the best, in that when it was all revealed in a rather forced denouement, I could see how the clues fit together for the solution, at least the clues we were given. The previous ones have been a bit lacking in clues, so I appreciated we were given more of a chance to solve it in this one. I also liked the whole spiel of Margaret being stabbed through a corset, which meant that she didn't bleed out and die until it was loosened. It's been done before, but I like it. I also like the opening passage with the Queen running through the hall. It's just quite a cool opening. There are moments of Reverend Richard Coles' writing style working effectively. Some humorous observations and funny lines here and there. They get a little lost and muddled though in the plethora of similarly crafted but less entertaining sentences. I quite like some of the recurring jokes. Daniel has this bee in his bonnet about the historical inaccuracies of the film, especially in regards to raucous mayhem into which the mask devolves, and is continuously brushed off. Bernard is a fun character in this one, a little annoyed at not being allowed free reign of his own house, while simultaneously enjoying the fact he gets to have a bunch of the staterooms restored for free, which has saved him a few bob as he was going to do it himself for the upcoming nuptials of his heir. I also like Miss March's character development. In previous books, she's been a little cold and distant and difficult to get into. A lot of her page time seemed to be her just being rude and having dramatic thoughts, which do not endearment nurture. Here we get more of a sense of her anxiety and how it feeds into her character and forms those colder facets. I like the setting with the film location. I think it would really lend itself thematically to murder mysteries. The idea of the guilty party pretending to be innocent in the same way an actor wears a character's face when the camera's rolling. But it's difficult, and this book illustrates why, in that they're so busy. There are so many people around and involved, both on and off camera. Things like police interviews all happened off page because there were like 100 to conduct. And I do think it was to the detriment of the story in this case, sadly. I also did like the idea of the mask. Now, I'm going to briefly explain what a mask is because I didn't really understand it fully myself, and the book certainly didn't help. Essentially, a mask is a type of entertainment for the courts in the 16th and 17th centuries. It's not a costume party, which is what I had in my head. There's a famous mask scene in Much Ado About Nothing, but it mostly comes across as a party where everyone wears a disguise for mistaken identity shenanigans. A feature a lot of books and films have borrowed from, liberally. But they aren't true masks. A mask is more like a show than a party. Bespoke staging and costumes would be created by contemporary masters. Professional actors and singers and musicians would be brought in to provide dance, drama and music, and courtiers often made up the non-speaking roles. Queen Anne of Denmark was especially fond of them, and Ben Jonson wrote a few for her. The one featured in this is The Mask of the Queens, wherein a witch and her disciples announce their crimes and perform a wild, impassioned dance, which somewhat echoes scene 3 of Macbeth, where the weird sisters tell each other of their various hijinks, like killing swine and cutting off thumbs. In The Mask, the witches are driven away by the arrival of Belana, Queen of the Sea, and her fellow mythical queens, who restore order. This mask is interesting for 2 reasons. Firstly, it is what is called an anti-mask. In fact, it may be the earliest example of the form, wherein there is a spectacle of disorder or grotesqueness to counterbalance the more orderly and acceptable mask. So the witches with their wild dance are the anti-mask, juxtaposing the stately mask of the queens. It is curious, therefore, that the book focuses so much on the whole mask dissolves into madness and debauchery, when that's historically inaccurate, when the mask they are performing literally has written into it a dance of madness and debauchery. But hey, what do I know? Secondly, this is possibly the first use of a rotating stage in theatre, which has nothing to do with anything, I just thought it was cool. This is the best front cover so far, because the little sausage dog has a little dog collar, and I quite like Director becoming Rector because my sense of humour is lame as heck. It always comes down to the writing, doesn't it? I really am a broken record at this point, but it's overly wordy and slow. I won't go on about the long, meandering sentences and the clumsy description because it's all rather part and par with Coles' writing style. I completely understand what effect he is trying to achieve here, and there are moments where he is successful, but the problem is he employs it all the time with no reprieve, so the genuinely funny lines are lost in a sea of similar but less effective prose. And other scenes which could be quite funny from a situational point of view, like cars getting stuck in the mud trying to get out the gates and this golf buggy struggling to get up a hill because the driver is too brake happy, aren't, because this wordy writing style slows the pacing down to a snail's crawl and basically throws the timing off for the joke. It takes too long, so it doesn't have the same impact. It does also affect the comprehension of the mystery. As I said, the clues given do point to the solution, which I understand and appreciate, but it is a bit difficult to follow because of all the unimportant stuff in between. I don't mean red herrings, I mean just stuff. A lot of this book takes place over one day, especially the evening where Audrey is hosting a dinner for an ever-increasing guest list, and it just drags on and on and on. I think it's supposed to be funny, but it's so slow it loses the comedy, and the writing style takes so much concentration to get through without tripping up on rambling subclauses that you'd forget about the mystery. A mystery should be like trying to solve a puzzle, but half the pieces in front of you are from a different puzzle entirely. You have to consider each piece carefully and decide whether or not they fit. This is more like trying to solve a puzzle, but the pieces are in a muddy bog. You find a piece, you set it aside, and by the time you found a second piece, you've forgotten what you've done with the first one. Also, there were no descriptions of the mask outfits. This is outrageous for two reasons. Firstly, it's a mask. How dare you deprive me of pretty outfit descriptions? Very rude. Secondly, there is a whole red herring of mistaken identity, but when you neglect to describe the costumes, you're not letting the reader understand how they could be mistaken for each other when the contextual clues all say otherwise. But I'll get more on that later. The mystery solution itself is fine, but the mystery plot really needed a bit more to it. I'd say spoilers, but there's no way you can read this without working out who the culprit is immediately. I did a quick sweep of Goodreads just to see other people's opinions, and a lot of people mentioned working out who did it without really knowing why. Fortunately, I do. There is literally only one person it could have been. The culprit is Gillian Smith, a famous actor. And it has to be her because no one else is given sufficient page time or attention to be a contender. We have the usual cast of recurring characters like Theo, Miss March and Audrey, so we know it won't be them. There's a red herring side mystery concerning Miss March and Brandon, but that's pretty guessable too. There are a few characters introduced who could have been suspects. There's the director, Dick, Carrie, Gillian's PA, Sandy, the Camp Glaswegian wardrobe guy who only has one scene, which is an outrage. Roger, the weapons master, is mentioned once, and there's Mike, the second directing assistant. And Gail, who's a runner, I suppose. But it's obvious they aren't serious suspects, or suspects at all, because we learn nothing about them. They're about as impactful as the scenery, with the one exception of Carrie, I suppose, but she's just not viable as a suspect. Neil also does very little investigating in this. There's an interview with Gillian, and he looks at the daily footage near the end, and that's about the only real police work he does. Most of the book is concerned with his dinner party and Brandon's drug-dealing side hustle, although I do know now the difference between hash and weed, so that's good, I guess. I didn't buy a few of the elements of the mystery. There was this whole drama about how Margaret might not have been the intended victim, but Gillian, because Gillian's nasty and Margaret has no enemies, even though she also seems kind of annoying. And because they were both dressed as queens, it would be easy for someone to stab the wrong one. I suppose this was meant to misdirect the reader away from the solution, but it was such a stupid subterfuge that I doubt it convinced anyone. You don't mix up the leading lady with an extra, even if they are both playing queens. Everyone on set would know which one is Gillian. We don't know how similar the costumes are because, as I've previously complained, Coles never describes them. And although they say it was dark and candlelit and you can't see well, that's stupid. It's a film set. It won't actually be that dark. I also didn't buy the murder weapon. It's a prop dagger, part of Theo's costume, but it went missing during filming. It was a little up in the air whether or not the murder weapon was the dagger or a farthingale pin, which was good. At last, a red herring! At the end, it is revealed that it was the dagger, but the dagger is a prop one. It's not real. As a prop, it isn't sharp. The weapons master does say that you can still do damage with prop daggers, and references some incident with Jean-Claude Van Damme stabbing someone's eye out, but I don't think it's comparable to the murder. Firstly, Jean-Claude Van Damme, the muscles from Brussels, is, as one might guess, quite the beefcake, especially compared to the murderer, who is so pathetic she doesn't have the strength most of the time to finish her own sentences. She does nothing for herself, and I imagine therefore has very little way of muscle definition. Like, she ain't strong. Secondly, the eye is a very soft part of the body. I'm not saying the waist, stomach, torso, where was she stabbed? It's like armour in comparison, but it's tougher than the eye, and you also have to go through several layers of thick, unyielding costume and corset. A blunt utensil takes 3 times as much force to stab with as a sharp knife, and that's not taking into consideration the stiff, durable material. I just don't buy that this weak, pathetic woman could have stabbed a blunt knife through someone's entire costume so neatly and quickly that no one noticed, especially as she's the star. I imagine all the extras are keeping an eye on her because she's super famous. It's just not believable. I'm not saying it's impossible because I'm no expert, but the book didn't convince me, and that is a problem. I thought it was going to be the farthingale pin, which is actually designed to go through the stiff material and costumes. They are mentioned as only being used for the stars, with the extras making do with safety pins. I thought the dagger was the red herring, used in a subplot, and Gillian had removed a farthingale pin from her own costume, stabbed Margaret with it, then surreptitiously wiped it on someone's skirt or something, and returned it to her costume, where no one questioned its existence. But no. I also didn't really understand why Miss March took the dagger. So at the Mask, Theo's dagger is stolen by Miss March, and is then stolen from her by Gillian Smith, used to stab Margaret, and smuggled off set somehow, and hidden in a display of swords somewhere else on the estate. There's this subplot about Miss March and Brandon, and we're led to believe that she's freaked out by him because he was the youth that inadvertently caused her father's fatal heart attack. But we discover that is not the case. Brandon is actually her son, which is easy to guess once you learn he was adopted. Miss March takes the dagger and confronts him, seen on camera, but we know that she's not threatening him with the knife because she wouldn't want to kill her own son. So did she take the knife because she thought he was going to kill Margaret? But although he had a motive, Margaret had him expelled from school, the timing's a bit random considering nothing has happened recently to particularly incense him. And if he's running this sneaky drugs business on set, why would he risk police involvement by attacking someone? You know, the more I look at this mystery, the less sense it actually makes. The Neil Daniel thing was a bit odd here. As I'm sure one remembers, book 3 ended with Neil snogging Daniel, his words not mine. We then had the Christmas special, Murder Under the Mistletoe, which didn't bring up the kiss, and Daniel and Neil acted like nothing weird had happened in there. Then in this one, we learn that they've barely spoken to each other in months because they both felt so awkward about it. This is at odds with the Christmas novella, which is definitely canon, because it is referenced in this one. They do eventually talk it out, which is admittedly a nice scene, and I guess they just leave things there and become friends/partners in crime solving again, which is fine. There was some psycho jargon from someone about Daniel only being in love with Neil because he was unattainable, and so when Neil snogged him, he lost that interest. We also learned that Neil only snogged him because he thought that's what Daniel wanted and he was just being nice. If that ain't bros being bros, I don't know what is. It's just a little difficult to accept Daniel just moving on so quickly and easily when he spent the entirety of Murder at the Monastery moping like Romeo when he found out who Juliet's dad was. I don't know, it was just a bit lame after the previous drama and heightened emotions. Oh well. And now for the random things that annoyed me. Brandon was apparently expelled when he was in year 7 or something, and a contributing factor was him drawing a rude picture in the bathroom. He claims the staff knew it was him because he was the only 11-year-old who knew what a cock and balls was. No, he is not. Crack sailor is a terrible clue for absolve. I get the AB for sailor and I get the solve for crack, but the clue is missing a vital element in the definition of the answer. Cryptic crosswords either begin or end with a more straightforward clue, often cleverly worded or blended to confuse, but always there. And this isn't me pulling nonsense out of my butt. Someone who writes cryptic crosswords says this.
The thing with a cryptic clue, compared to a normal clue, is there is a normal clue hiding in it. A cryptic clue is basically 2 separate clues. You've got a normal quick crossword clue and some wordplay, and they both lead to the same answer.
I don't know why I'm getting so upset about a cryptic crossword clue. But here we are. At one point, Gillian asked Neil what Margaret was wearing when she died, and he doesn't know. How can Neil not know what the victim was wearing? He's a detective. He saw the body. Ridiculous. I think there's a mistake in the blurb. It says spring in Champton, but at least twice the book tells us it's September, and the events take place over, 2 days. What's going on there? I really, really, really want Coles to get better because I do think he's capable of writing a good mystery. I think he just has this urge or this idea that he has to write in a certain way because that's what people expect, even if it's detrimental to the story. I think if he let himself pare it back and choose carefully the moments to go full Coles, that would lend him a bigger portion of the word count to focus on mystery and investigation, with more clues, more red herrings, and more suspects. This is probably the one I enjoyed the most mystery-wise, although I do think the first one was a little funny with the church politics and the Flower Guild antics. And now that the Neil Daniel thing has been laid to rest and the Miss March Brandon malarkey has been explained, maybe the next one will have a little more focus on the mystery as opposed to random side dramas. I have a suspicion that either the next one or the one after will take place at the wedding of Bernard de Flors' eldest son, and I do love me some wedding hijinks, but I suppose we'll have to wait and see. Later this month, the first episode of the TV series based on the first book, Murder Before Evensong, will be released. And even though I still think Matthew Lewis is far too young and handsome to play Daniel, I am looking forward to watching it. The Thursday Murder Club film is also out on Netflix too, so I suppose I'll give that a go, although I'm not convinced by Pierce Brosnan playing Ron. But we'll see. And that's all I have to say. Until next time, bye.